Every supreme legal order faces a structural necessity. To maintain ultimate authority, a constitution must establish the limits of its own amendment. A document that can be supplemented without its own authorization ceases to be the supreme rule. It becomes merely one authority among many. The Torah explicitly defines its own boundaries. In the book of Deuteronomy, the text issues a clear closure clause. You shall not add to the word that I command you, nor diminish from it. The legislative horizon is declared sealed. Yet over the millennia, 5 major streams of Jewish thought, rabbinic, philosophical, Kabbalistic, Hasidic, and modern, have each built comprehensive systems around this exact text. They all claim to interpret it. We are going to test those claims. This is a juridical audit of structural grammar, not a theological judgment. We are not evaluating whether these later systems are spiritually profound or internally coherent. We are asking one structural question. Can the governing categories of a constitutional order be introduced after the Constitution has declared its own closure? Development unfolds principles already present inside the text. Addition imports a governing category from the outside. The closure clause permits the first and prohibits the second. Before we can audit a later system against the Torah, we have to isolate the measuring stick itself. We must provisionally strip away all subsequent philosophical and mystical overlays to locate the text's native vocabulary. Stripped of later traditions, the Torah describes itself through a specific vocabulary: brit for covenant, mitzvah for command, and chok for statute. Every one of these terms is strictly relational, juridical, and historical. This animated timeline represents the Torah's native grammar. It operates entirely on a horizontal axis. It establishes a bilateral legal relationship between a sovereign, Yahweh, and a vassal, Israel, cemented at a specific moment in time. Look at what the text never claims. The Torah never calls itself an emanation. It never claims to be a pre-existent cosmic blueprint or the inner essence of the divine. Those are later theological constructions. They have no docking point on this horizontal timeline. Because the text explains itself exclusively through legal and historical terms, the burden of proof shifts. Any later system employing outside frameworks must demonstrate those frameworks were derived directly from the text's own grammar rather than superimposed on top of it. We test Rabbinic Judaism using a 4-quadrant dashboard: origin, governing category, function, and hermeneutic. Calibrated to the Torah's baseline, it introduces a severe divergence in the origin quadrant, adding an Oral Torah treated as co-original to the written text at Sinai. Alongside this second text, it introduces a formal hermeneutic apparatus and an ordained legislating rabbinate. This human court is empowered to derive and generate binding legal obligations that the written text never states. The original Constitution named specific actors: judges, priests, and kings, restricting them to applying existing law. It explicitly withheld the power of legislative generation. Rabbinic Judaism installs a new institution that claims exactly that power. The deviation here is jurisdictional. By expanding the authorized sources of law and empowering human courts to legislate, the center of constitutional power moves away from the sealed written document. Resetting the matrix for Maimonidean philosophy, the divergence strikes the function quadrant. The unreasoned statute, the chok, is transformed. Rather than binding by sovereign decree alone, Rambam assigns these laws pedagogical rationales, turning them into tools to perfect the intellect and achieve philosophical cognition. In the Torah's native grammar, a chok binds the vassals strictly because the sovereign decreed it. Its authority relies entirely on unconditioned obedience. Rambam does not repeal the laws, but he reassigns their purpose. He converts a binding legal covenant into an instrumental philosophical curriculum, moving the ultimate goal outside the text itself. Kabbalah and Chabad Hasidism introduce the most radical relocation, replacing the horizontal historical timeline with a vertical ontological axis. This descent stack flows downward from absolute divine essence, atzmut, through pleasure and will. The Torah is positioned far down this chain as a lower-rung expression. Chabad argues the human soul is rooted directly in atzmut, placing it ontologically higher than Torah. Under this vertical metaphysics, the Torah's legal asymmetries, Distinctions between statute and judgment, priest and Israelite, are flattened into mere symbolic garments of a single divine will. Obligation is reframed. A treaty duty owed to a sovereign becomes an ontological technology, a mechanism performed by the individual to reveal the soul's pre-existent root in the divine essence. The Torah insists its authority derives from historical concreteness. It binds the vassal because of a specific event at a specific mountain, involving specific people at a specific time. It grounds itself in the dirt of history, not in an eternal cosmic structure. By imposing an ontological hierarchy above the text, the Torah suffers a severe demotion. It is no longer the supreme constitution establishing a relationship. It is reduced to a conduit for accessing a higher reality. Resetting the matrix for modern Judaism, the text is no longer viewed as a one-time divine act, but an evolving communal process. The origin and hermeneutic quadrants turn fluid, as laws are subjected to continuous ethical revision by each new generation. The original Constitution directly addresses this. The succession clause explicitly binds future, non-consenting generations to the original sovereign act. The authority flows downward through time, independent of later approval. The evolutionary model reverses this flow, relocating authority to the ethical judgment of the present. The community transforms from constitutional recipient into ongoing co-author. Treating the text's own content as historically revisable is the ultimate inversion of the closure clause. The present community grants itself the standing to re-ratify or amend the terms, making the governed the authorizer of the covenant. We have tested 5 systems against the baseline. Each one retains the physical text, that each one relocates something structural around it: jurisdiction, teleology, ontology, or historical finality. These systems cannot interlock with the Torah's native vocabulary. Metaphysics demands atemporal universality. Legal covenants demand historical particularity. They cannot occupy the same space. The constitutional identity theorem states, a constitution possesses final authority only if its identity is determined by its own enacted categories. The moment external categories are introduced to explain what the Torah really is, the Torah's authority becomes derivative. It ceases to be the supreme constitution of the relationship and becomes a mere manifestation of a different explanatory system. These later traditions are not interpreting the original constitution. They are replacing its foundational architecture with entirely new conceptual frameworks. This structural analysis draws a strict boundary. Pointing out these architectural incompatibilities does not invalidate the spiritual truth, the beauty, or the internal logic of any later Jewish tradition. Rabbinic, Hasidic, and modern traditions provide profound theological meaning, robust ethical frameworks, and vibrant identity to living, thriving populations. But theology and constitutional jurisprudence operate on completely different levels of discourse. A theology explains why a relationship exists. A constitution is the binding law of the relationship itself. If the goal is to understand the Torah's constitutional identity, the document must be allowed to define its own grammar, long before any subsequent tradition arrives to redefine it. The closure clause enforces a cold, structural reality. True constitutional authority demands exclusivity. The moment a supreme law is supplemented from the outside, it is no longer supreme.